Come on, come on. Listen to what I say. Good morning. I'm Amelia Domenko, President and CEO of the Women's Business Development Center. It is my honor to welcome you to the launch of Raising Up the Vote, the intersection of gender and racial equality. This is a virtual event series presented in partnership with Target. As we honor the 100th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment, we realize we still have more work to do to ensure that voices of all women, especially women of color, and all underrepresented members of the community are heard. This year and every year, the WBDC advocates for social change. We do that by promoting entrepreneurship and economic independence for women, minorities, and other underserved and underrepresented business owners. Our support and advocacy strengthens the impact of these entrepreneurs on the economy so they create jobs, fuel economic growth, and contribute to building strong communities. Economic self-sufficiency is directly connected to public policy and representation. Fair and equitable policies help secure and maintain economic independence for all of us. Diverse civic engagement and political representation empowers communities and ensures all of our voices are heard in the process. Most importantly, it shows future generations of leaders from all backgrounds that they are capable of enacting change. That is why we are here today, to learn from inspiring diverse leaders on how we can raise our voice and our vote to accelerate opportunities for women, minorities, and other underrepresented communities. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and please visit WBDC.org to find other opportunities to be civically engaged. Now, it is my privilege to introduce two of those inspiring women to kick off this important conversation. A longtime friend of the Women's Business Development Center is Melody Spann Cooper. As chairman of the Midway Broadcasting Corporation, Melody is part of an elite list of America's female broadcast owners, a pillar of the Chicago community. Melody has served in many other professional capacities, including co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Council for the Obama Library Foundation and vice chair of the Illinois Broadcasting Association. In addition to leading programming for Chicago's thriving Black and Hispanic populations, Melody is a recognized leader in business and released her first book, The Girlfriend's Guide to Closing the Deal, last year. And now, I have the honor of introducing an advocate for minority-owned small businesses and underrepresented community. She serves on the U.S. Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, among many other distinctions, and that is U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth. Raise your hands up! Raise them up! Hey! Come on, come on. Listen to what I say.
Hello, everybody. I'm Melody Spann Cooper, chairman of Midway Broadcasting Corporation, proud supporter of the Women's Business Development Center. I am so honored to be here for this special virtual meetup today with one of my favorite legislators, and I'm sure one of yours as well, for a special program we're calling Raising Up the Vote. History, now, and in the future. It's powered by the Women's Business Development Center. And the lady of the hour is our esteemed Illinois U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth. Senator Duckworth, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to do an abbreviated version of your bio because it is lengthy. It is lengthy and well-deserved, but so that we can get right into what I hope will be a robust conversation. U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth is a Iraq War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and former Assistant Secretary of the Department of Veteran Affairs, who was among the first Army women to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She attended college at the University of Hawaii and earned a Master's of Arts in International Affairs from George Washington University. Senator Duckworth moved to the great state of Illinois, where she pursued her PhD in political science at Northern Illinois University, and she also worked at the Rotary International there. In 2004, Senator Duckworth was deployed to Iraq as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot for the Illinois Army National Guard. And on November 12, 2004, something happened that would forever change her life. Her helicopter was hit by an RPG and she lost her legs and partial use of her right arm. Senator Duckworth spent the next year recovering at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where she quickly became an advocate for her fellow soldiers. After she recovered, she became the director of the Illinois Department of Veteran Affairs. In 2009, President Obama tapped her to be the Assistant Secretary of Veteran Affairs. In 2012, Senator Duckworth was elected to Congress and served on the House Armed Services Committee and was an advocate for working families and job creation. She also passed a very important piece of legislation while there, the Troop Talent Act, to help returning veterans find jobs in the private sector. In the U.S. Senate, Senator Duckworth advocates for growing manufacturing jobs while supporting minority-owned small businesses and investing in communications that has been ignored far too long, in communities that have been ignored far too long. In 2018, she did something that all women were so proud of after giving birth to and being the first woman senator to do so. She secured a historic rule change that allowed senators to bring their infant children to the floor of the Senate. She also serves on several influential committees, including the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, which brings her to the Women Business Development Center to have this conversation today. I shortened.
My mom wrote that. My mama wrote that. It could go on forever.
No, it's powerful. It's powerful. So thank you so much for joining us. Listen, last week, we can't start this conversation without talking about last week, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. It was much to do. I saw so many virtual conversations from all over the country, right? People participating in forums. As one of the highest ranking public officials in the country, share with us what that means for you.
Oh my gosh, it means everything to me. It means that we are getting to be more like the country that we were founded on, with the values, towards that more perfect union. We're not near that perfect union. We're not going to get there until we have equal representation, not in terms of gender, but also in terms of diversity with people from all racial backgrounds or all different identities, until the government of the people reflects the people. We truly are not going to reach that more perfect union that we can be. I mean, we're already a great nation, but women are still less than 25% of elected office holders in the Senate and in the House. And we certainly, I mean, my gosh, in the Senate, we have more white men named John in the United States than we do have women of color.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
I mean, that's crazy, right? So we need to do better.
Yes.
So I'm so proud of the 19th Amendment. I'm so proud that Illinois was one of the first to ratify it. But frankly, we still have a long way to go, and we have to get more people elected so that we have more voices in the boardrooms and in the halls of Congress.
Yeah.
That represents where people are in our country.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Listen, you've got a master's in international affairs and a PhD in political science. I would think that's a great recipe to becoming an attorney, right? So how did you get into politics? What was the pivot for you?
Well, listen, my PhD is actually in health and human services now.
Okay.
I switched after I started, but
okay.
I never wanted to be in politics. I thought I was going to join the Foreign Service or the Peace Corps. I loved my job at Rotary International. I love not-for-profits that do humanitarian aid and do social service programs. I got shut down. That's what turned things around. I got wounded in Iraq.
Mhm.
And all I wanted to do was serve my nation. And I met two people of consequence. I met Dick Durbin, and I met Barack Obama, who had just been elected to the United States Senate 4 months prior,
Mm.
just a few months prior. You know, he'd just taken office not too long before that. And the two of them gave me a new mission in life. And they said, if you think that this nation is not doing right by military men and women, then you need to run for office. And they encouraged me to run. And mentored me. And that's how I got into politics. I never thought I would be in politics.
Wow.
But you know what's interesting, Melody, is that
Mm.
most women in politics stories are that men generally like become law attorneys because they want to run for office, and then they run for office. But if you talk to most of the women who ran, they had a whole other career trajectory, and they got mad about something.
Wow.
They got pissed off about something that wasn't really right, and then they run for office. Think about all the way. Think about Kara Mosley Braun. Think about all the greats out there. They were doing something else.
You are so correct. You are so correct.
This is how we fix things.
Yeah, I got a question. I got a question for you later in our conversation that's right there too. It's right there. Before we get there though, your trajectory is like no other. You've had a stellar career as a veteran, a well-respected politician, and every step of the way you were driving policy, passing legislation, and being a change agent for causes you believe in. What is your best advice on how women can demand equity at the seat of opportunity?
Well, it's about not getting pushed around, and it's about believing in yourself. I mean, not a day goes by when I don't wake up and have imposter syndrome, right? And feel like, oh my gosh, I sit in the Democratic caucus, and I'm sitting there, and the seat that I hold in the Senate is Kara Mosley Braun and Barack Obama's seat. I hold the seat of giants, and for me, you have imposter syndrome, but you can't listen to that little voice in your head that second guesses you and your power. You have to come and say, hey, you know what? I can do this. If they can do this, I can do this. And you don't let yourself get pushed around. It happens to the best of us. I remember sitting in the House at a meeting with Democrats, and Speaker Pelosi, asked us all to comment on some issue. I don't remember what it was, but we made a comment, and one woman one of the female representatives made a comment, and everybody just sort of nodded. And then like 3 people down, a male person made the same comment. People were like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And Leader Pelosi said, well, that's great, but she said it first.
Yes.
Right. And she reinforced it. She wasn't going to let somebody get, and she really taught us that. And so we have to believe in ourselves and not get pushed around and say, no, my voice matters.
And own it, right?
Yep.
Right. Women make up 25% of the U.S. Senate. That's 1/4 of its entire body. Are women more likely to drive issues of gender and racial equity in our communities than our male counterparts? And if so, why is that so?
It's because we live it. I think we are, and it's not to say that there are not allies out there, right? We all can be allies in an area that is not our expertise. But we all live our reality, and we live our lives, and we live our community, and we bring that to the table. That's why we need greater diversity in the United States Senate and in all offices. So a good example is when I became a new mom, not a young mom, because I had my kids at 46 and 50. So I always say I'm a new mom, not a young one. And I started breastfeeding. And even though I had been in office before, and I thought I was a very much, right at the forefront on women's issues and women's rights, I didn't understand the problems that working moms face with trying to breastfeed and express breast milk when you're traveling, until I had to do it myself.
Wow.
And that's what led me to write the FAM Act, which requires all airports to have lactation rooms for women who are traveling so that they can express breast milk. I was unaware of that until I had to live that reality. And so that's why we need greater representation. Not to say that I don't have great allies. I have allies. Men signed on to that. But I had to live it to recognize the problem that was there. So until we have Black women and brown women and transgendered women and people from poor communities and rich communities all represented, the realities of the lived lives, of the lived experiences, doesn't get represented in the halls of power until that happens.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important for women to be at the table too. Our lens is so much different. It's so much broader, right?
Right.
Because of the responsibilities that we have as mothers, as
Mhm.
sometimes head of households, right?
Right.
That we bring a different lens that is so important right now, that makes the conversation and everything we do so much more robust, right? And so much more, we think broader because we're at the table. Conversation becomes better and more robust. I think it's just so dynamic. I think it's just
Right.
so dynamic. So we talk about that in context of you being a politician, a government stakeholder. How can women individually who may not be in politics, right? And you think about women who are in the community now and just really taking leaderships of organizations. How can they use their power to influence gender and racial equity in our communities?
Well, I think there's two things that you can do is you can yourself strive for more and not talk yourself out of things.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Emily's list says that Emily's List is an organization that helps women run for office.
sure.
It stands for Early Money is Like Geese. Emily's List. They say that women on average have to be asked 7 times to run for office before they finally say yes, whereas men look in the mirror when they get up and
Right,
say, why am I not a senator? You
right.
know.
Or I think I'll run for president today.
Yeah, I think I run for president today, right? But women have to be asked 7 times to run for the school board before they
Yeah,
run, right? So
yeah.
you yourself have to strive for that, but you also have to mentor others. And I get invited to speak at a lot of places where I'm talking about mentoring other women and mentoring folks. But I also say that by assuming a leadership role, you also need to mentor the young men
Mm,
because it's important for young men to see women and to see, and especially for young white men to see women of color in these
yeah,
leadership roles and see how well they do. Because
yeah,
you have to mentor everybody. You
yeah.
yourself may not have had the benefit of great mentorship and had to fight your own way to break through that glass ceiling because those mentors were not there. I
Mhm.
was very fortunate. I had mentors. I had Dick Durbin. I had Barack Obama.
Yeah,
Um, but if you got there and you didn't have those mentors, you had to be that mentor for those below you. And you
yeah,
have to not just focus, I mean, you have to focus on the women and the women of color in particular, but you also don't forget about the men
yeah.
because you can't let them reinforce the negative stereotypes that already exist. You got to
Hmm.
show them, that
That's true.
women of color can be powerful and are
Yeah,
good leaders, and in fact are better leaders in many ways because they have a much broader, as you said, field of view than
yeah.
other folks in leadership positions.
Sure, sure. So the Women's Business Development Center is an organization whose DNA, of course, is cultivating the talents of women who aspire to own businesses. It's not what they do, it's just who they are, right, as an
Right.
organization. You presently serve on the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Tell us how your work there has benefited small business owners in the state of Illinois.
Well, I've worked on several things. I am very focused on the SBA's microloan program. It
Yeah.
offers loans of $50,000 or less through nonprofit lenders. Women-owned businesses, and especially small businesses and small businesses of color, uh,
Mm-hmm.
don't always bank with large banks, because the large banks don't want to deal with them, right? Their money, their capital from not-for-profit lenders or small community banks or from other small
Credit, yeah,
like
credit
that.
unions, yeah,
Credit
yeah.
unions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also black-owned banks, right? In
Yeah,
Chicago, right now we only have a single black-owned bank. I mean, how can
right.
Chicago and only have a single black-owned bank? We need more.
Yeah,
So I've been working a lot to promote these non-traditional lenders, these not-for-profit lenders, these minority-owned banks, so that we can get access to capital can grow for small businesses. Because in Illinois, 95% of our employers in the entire state are small businesses.
sure.
They are the lifeblood of Illinois' economy. And
Mhm.
and small businesses, and especially businesses of color and veteran-owned businesses and women-owned businesses,
Sure,
tend to hire more people of color and hire more
absolutely.
women and hire more veterans. So supporting their success actually helps make us more successful as a state and as a business community. And so I actually wrote a bill called the Microloan Program Enhancement Bill. It would improve this microloan program in several ways. It would increase the total amount that lenders can give to borrowers each year. It increases the amount of technical assistance funding so that lenders can get from the SBA. It eliminates a lot of the rules that slows down the flow of funding. The 155th rule is an example that slows down funding and technical assistance from the SBA. It eliminates that so that you can actually get money and funding and technical assistance out sooner and more of it to small businesses. And I'm also committed to increasing the loan terms from 6 years to 8 years and create incentives for lending to rural areas, to underserved, economically challenged areas, and all of that. So those are just ongoing issues that I'm working on, specifically on the Small Business Committee.
Oh, that's great. And that's dynamic. How can women find out more about that, Senator Duckworth?
Well, absolutely reach out to my office, but also to your local chambers of commerce, and especially your minority chambers of commerce, the Black Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of the other organizations we can provide you that help. But my office can certainly put you in touch with the right organizations as well.
What can you share during this time after COVID? I mean, this the world is a different place because of this pandemic, right? And I went through the recession of 2008 and 2009, and I'm not kidding. It changed me as a businesswoman. It changed my business, my outlook on my business, right? And then not even 10 years later, it seems, just a little over 10 years later, we were faced with this pandemic. And from the time that I went through it until now, there have been so many new businesses that have onboarded, right? So many young entrepreneurs who find themselves devastated right now. Not only just mentally trying to figure out, how they overcome this, but this pandemic, I saw something in the news today, Senator Duckworth, that 40% of small businesses in San Francisco are not coming back, right? They just won't be able to return. What can you share with small business owners who are watching us, women-owned businesses right now about the aftermath of this? How do we get through this, during this time in our country as small business owners?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that you didn't have to face the last economic downturn that you're facing now is you actually suddenly have to become a healthcare expert. Like you are now a small business owner, supposed to be a medical doctor dealing with a global pandemic, trying to figure out what's safe for your employees and your
That's true. That's true.
Right? When you sign up to start a business and when you become a small business owner, you sign up for all of the headaches of, payroll and getting customers and competing and finding capital. But at no point did you sign up to be on the front lines of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
All of these small businesses are now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a double whammy. And then, of course, we have a situation with criminal justice reform where we actually have a division in this country where the president of the United States is actively promoting racism. So that now if you are a small business owner of color, you're facing that issue as well. And so you now have triple the problems that you did just trying to start a business before. And so what I say to them is, we have to do better and we have to support them, businesses better. That's why with the COVID relief packages that we're fighting for, I'm fighting very hard, and so is Dick Durbin. All Democrats are for more money into the Paycheck Protection Program for specifically small businesses that would be lent out through non-traditional lenders tied to a loan forgiveness program so that those loans are actually forgiven as long as you bring your employees back to work. And that's the goal, is for you to stay in business, give you enough money that you can survive this, and then bring people back to work, and then not hit you immediately with, now you owe money and you got to repay this. We basically need to write off these loans because we have to look at it as an investment in our national economy.
Right.
But we have to make that loan forgiveness, even the application process, easier than it is. The Department of the Treasury wrote crazy, complicated system and lots of bureaucracies on how you would actually even apply for it as it exists. We have to streamline that. We need more money in the EDIL program, the Economic Disaster Injury Loan Program, that is just outright grant money. Right now, the first $10,000 of that is grant money to help you to just survive to the end of the month.
Yeah.
You know, and we need to provide more money in that program that is outright grant money so that you can survive it. And so those are some of the things that we can do. We can, again, as I said, put more money into the SBA's various programs that go directly to microloans, that go directly to community not-for-profits that help businesses to survive. And then we as a nation have to figure out this testing issue for COVID testing. We need to make it widespread and low cost or free, because the economy is never going to get moving again if we can't get all of our workers tested and provide them with paid healthcare, paid medical leave. That is not on the back of employers, so that people, if they are tested and they come up positive, that they can actually afford to stay home for 14 days and get better or live or stay quarantine. And that should not be on the back of our employers, bottom line. And so there's some of the things that we can do when it specifically with this, with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and I'll just share with those watching that as tough as it is, business ebbs and it flows, right? And so it is at these times that we are really made. So for all of our entrepreneurs, you got to stay encouraged. You have to do what Senator Duckworth says. There is help from the government. You know, really explore those lending opportunities and those grant opportunities that get you over. And don't get so bogged down into, you know, the negative thoughts of defeat or loss. Really breathe life now more than ever. You know, just bunker down and vision and really feed your dreams and your aspirations in your business, because it is right here in the Valley which we become who we are as business people. Trust me, Senator Duckworth, I'm not kidding. After 2008, 2009, I just could not even imagine, you know, coming back from that, right? And what it did, it actually prepared me for this season. It really did. So, and we can get through this. We can survive. Want to pivot one more time with you. One more time with you. So I see you. You are a woman of color. You are a person with disability. You check a lot of boxes, right? And so when you stand there and you're advocating in this exclusive club, that you belong in the most exclusive club in America, right? The U.S. Senate. You have a wide depth of empathy because you see from so many lenses, right? Tell me, how do you decide? Where do you pull that from as a leader with so many different, you know, ways to look at issues, right? How does Senator Tammy Duckworth come to her true self, her true legislative beliefs when these matters come up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is who I am as a person and my personal beliefs and my personal experiences, you know, whether it's my dad losing his job in his 50s and me ending up on food stamps and hungry. And, you know, there were times when school breakfast and school lunch were the only meals I ate because we had no money at the end of the month when the food stamps ran out. So there's my personal belief in social safety nets and in opportunities I've received in this country. But it's also looking to those who have lifted me up even before I knew I needed to be lifted up. The fact that I can be a United States Senator and roll across those marble floors of the United States Capitol is because 30 years ago, people with disability literally crawled up the steps of the Capitol demanding the passage of the ADA, right? The fact that, you know, when my parents got together, you know, they could not have been married when my dad's homestead. I mean, my dad was overseas, but had he wanted to marry my mom in his home state of Virginia, he couldn't have because they were biracial couple before Loving v. Virginia passed. You know, I was you know, my experience. Look, I am not a Black woman. I could never understand or live the experience of people in this committee from the Black community with the inherent racism and brutality that exists against Black people in particular. But the work that John Lewis, you know, my former colleague, did to lift up this nation and with me with it before I even knew that I need to be lifting up. So looking back to that heritage from all of those people who came before me, whether it was women suffragettes, whether it was the you know, people fighting for civil rights, whether it was the people fighting for disability rights, whether it was the women who fought, you know, to be able to serve in the military, who broke that ceiling before I joined. All of those things are wells of inspiration, you know. It's about honoring, remembering them, but looking to them for the truth and the work that needs to be done. You know, I stand on their shoulders, and someday I hope somebody else will stand on my shoulders. And we're just all part of that link, but you can't forget where we came from.
Yeah.
And try to be true to that. So for me, that's what's in my mind when I decide what I want to do in the Senate, is my own lived experiences, but also the lived experiences of people who came before me, who
That's
allow me
powerful.
to do what I'm doing today.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing. Last question. Last week, you participated in the Democratic National Convention. I saw you there. And you were on the short list of candidates to become vice president, right? And while the WBDC is a 501c3 and we can't really talk politics, we do have a politician here, right? So I wanted to know what that felt like. I mean, imagine that, right? When you look at the lens in hindsight, you've seen the trajectory of your career, right? And then you are on a short list to become a vice presidential candidate. Share with us that experience and how it felt, and how you felt being a part, especially at this time of the convention last week.
Oh my gosh, I was so proud. You know what? It was. I will be honest. The vetting process for vice president was brutal. And I was very fortunate to make it all the way to the final selection, and had my personal meeting with Vice President Biden. So that part was, that was definitely, it's a process. You just go through it. But it was so exciting. I was so proud because so many of the other women were my girlfriends. So Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor of New Mexico, and I were freshmen in the House together. We're class of 2012. Catherine Cortez Masto and Kamala Harris and I were freshman senators together. So we, and Karen Bass. I mean, we were all like colleagues in the House. So, I mean, so for me, it was like a girlfriend's reunion. And I was just so proud that the Democratic Party had over a dozen well-qualified women and range of color. We had the rainbow of color of women who could all be vice president of the United States. This is not something the other party can claim to. So it was just exciting, and it was just fun to have my name mentioned among some of these amazing kick-ass women, and to be able to actually, talk to my friends and chat so it was just really, it was just really exciting. It was just an honor to even be mentioned in the same breath as folks. And I'm so thrilled that if a woman was going to be selected to be vice president, it would be one of my classmates. Girl, Kamala, actually, the women senators get together fairly often, and Kamala cooks dinner for us often. She's a vegan, and she cooks amazing Indian food, South Asian food. So
that's amazing. And I understand there's like 120 women of color running for Congress this time. That has to make you proud to know.
Democrats,
that's amazing, right?
It's fantastic. Well, but I'm going to give you a really bad statistic.
Okay.
Just so when we helped the nation of Afghanistan write a new constitution after we kicked, after the war in Afghanistan started and they became a new nation, we made them write into their new constitution a requirement that 25% of their legislative body had to be women.
Wow.
Up until recently, women were only 22% of the legislative body of the United States. So Afghanistan had better representation percentage-wise than the United States. So this is great. We have all these women, but until we get to 51%, until we have fewer men named John than color in the United States Senate, we're not there yet.
Yeah, and that would be more reflective of our country, right? 51% women. I love that. You have been a joy to talk to, Senator Duckworth. This is the longest time that we've ever shared, just talking one-on-one with a whole bunch of people watching us. But I learned so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing to empower women and minorities in the business sector. It is important. It is so very, very important. And we appreciate your insights on that and your work in that and all that you do for veterans, for just representing Illinois the way that you do. So I want to give a couple of shout outs to my dear sister, Hetty Ratner, who is just, that's my sister. I call my sister from another mister. And then Carol McDougall and Amelia, who runs the Women Business Development Center, and my good friend Roxanne Ward, the entire team there. Thank you all so much for allowing me to do this with Senator Duckworth today. It's Raising Up the Vote. History, now, future. It's powered by the Women's Business Development Center. For those of you who are watching and are new to the Women's Business Development Center, what is wrong with you? Log on to their website and find out what's happening. If you know young women who are interested in business and are looking for resources and a great networking and a sisterhood, this is the organization for you. Please check them out. And until next time, hopefully we'll be able to get back to where we can hug and touch one another. But until next time, we thank you. We appreciate you so much. And bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you.
All right.
Raise your hands up. Raise them up. Hey. Come on, come on. Listen to what I say.
Welcome to today's moderated conversation, Raising Up the Vote, History, Now, Future. We're going to explore the history and current landscape of voting rights, the representation of women in leadership roles, and mostly the importance of civic engagement as a pathway to women's economic self-sufficiency. My name is Ellen Sherberg. I'm the special advisor to the CEO at American City Business Journals. I'm going to be able to moderate today's discussion, and it's truly an honor to do so. First, I'd like to introduce you to our panel of incredible women. They've raised their voices and their votes and have been able to create positive change in their organizations and in our communities. These are trailblazers who have fought for our voices and our rights. They've become civically engaged, and they've changed our world. Throughout nearly 30 years of public service, Congresswoman Gwen Moore has been at the forefront of some of our nation's most significant leadership, it's been at the forefront of some of our nation's most significant legislative achievements as a leader. Congresswoman Moore has gained a reputation of a fearless advocate for women and children. She was elected to represent Wisconsin's 4th Congressional District in 2004. That made her the first African-American elected to Congress from the state of Wisconsin. Congresswoman Moore has been a consistent leader on issues such as healthcare reform, women's health, maternal and infant mortality, and domestic violence. She was the leading voice in reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, and she has authored legislation, including the Domestic Violence Gun Homicide Prevention Act of 2017. Our second panelist is Dorothy Bridges. Dorothy is a member of the U.S. Bancorp Board of Directors. She is also a former executive of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. She served as Senior Vice President, Public Affairs, Outreach, and Community Impact. Dorothy is a native of New Orleans, and she has more than 40 years of banking experience, most of which was focused on community and small business lending and development markets. She's known for her leadership in the community. She's been involved with the boards of several distinguished institutions on the local and national levels. And Dorothy has been publicly recognized for her distinguished leadership, including the Washington Business Journal's 10 People to Watch. Our third panelist today is McGee Osei. McGee is a seasoned marketing and advertising professional. She is co-CEO of Burrell Communications Group of Chicago. It's one of the leading and most highly regarded multicultural advertising agencies in our country. McGee is credited with starting the agency's Urban, that's Y-U-R-B-A-N. It's a trademark name, Urban Marketing Initiative. And that became the gold standard in reaching youth and young adults during the early days of hip hop. She also started the agency's growing political practice, although the hip hop stuff sounds much more interesting. McGee is highly regarded as an advocate for multicultural marketing. She served on numerous industry boards and committees. She's also received many awards, including the inaugural Advertising Legend Award from AdColor Industry Coalition for outstanding professional achievement. McGee's strong concern and sense of community keeps her active as a member of the board of directors for the International Black Women's Public Policy Institute, as well as many other organizations. To round out this powerhouse panel, it's my pleasure to introduce Kristen Maple Bloomberg. Dr. Bloomberg is a professor of women's studies and legal studies, faculty affiliate at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. She also holds the Hamline University Endowed Chair in the Humanities. She received her PhD from the University of Nebraska. Research interests focus on the history of Midwestern women's social movement. Dr. Bloomberg has published on topics including women's social and civic organizations, women's suffrage in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and North Dakota, and women in early collegiate coeducation. Kristen's the guest editor for a special issue of the Minnesota History Quarterly that's focused on women's suffrage. It's going to be published this fall by the Minnesota Historical Society. I'd like to welcome all the panelists for being with us today. To help frame our conversation this morning, I'd like to ask each of you to share your perspective on history and as well as on the current landscape of voting rights. If you could also speak to the state of representation of women in leadership roles and the importance of women's economic self-sufficiency, that would be a tremendous addition. Kristen, as the historian, I think it's appropriate for you to begin.
Right. Well, let's talk about the 19th Amendment a little bit. The 19th Amendment was one milestone in the long, continuing social movement for women's rights and women's suffrage. It affirmed, but did not secure voting access for all women. The work began long before 1920, and it continues today. Voting goes hand in hand with civic engagement, and women have been part of the fabric of civic engagement since well before 1920. In fact, women's activism for voting access built on earlier aspects of their civic engagement. We see this in the rise of the women's club movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Women's rights and women's suffrage was a part of that, and diverse women engaged the work. Through clubs, like-minded women got together to improve themselves in their communities. They promoted education for children and raised funds to build hospitals to provide community health care. They were also active providing and promoting urban sanitation, food safety, and the elimination of poverty. Better wages and working conditions for women and the elimination of child labor were also on their agenda. Women across all race and class categories were active in clubs that addressed these issues. And this included Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color who also focused on combating the effects of segregation, racism, and the white violence against members of their communities. So through this work, women built public leadership skills and learned how they could influence policy and law. They also learned about the importance of building coalitions to access avenues to political power to reach their goals. So what does this have to do with voting? Well, we often think of voting every few years before a big federal or state election, but voting occurs regularly on smaller issues. School boards, judges, or city, county, and state initiatives that impact one's taxes or quality of life. Activists in the women's rights and women's suffrage movement understood that their ability to additionally participate in civic engagement through voting on all of these issues was paramount. And when women were eligible to run for office on school and library boards or in city, county, and state government, they were able to lead on issues that were important to them. Suffragists understood that voting allowed women to influence the selection of people who make and enforce policies and laws. So voting access through the passage of the 19th Amendment became an important goal. Now, it's important to note that American women did vote prior to 1920. The 19th Amendment built on other achievements that allowed some women to vote in certain circumstances. So let me talk a little bit about the example of Minnesota, which has a similar history to other states in its progression of women's voting rights. In 1875, Minnesota was likely the first state to pass a constitutional amendment explicitly granting women the ability to vote on local school matters and be elected to school boards. This was expanded in 1885 when Minnesota women gained the ability to vote for county school superintendents, but they had to submit their votes to a separate ballot box for women. More than 10 years later, in 1898, Minnesota women gained the ability to vote for and serve on municipal library boards. And in the spring of 1919, about 5 months before the Minnesota legislature ratified the 19th Amendment, Minnesota established women's ability to vote for presidential electors, but not for other offices like governor, Congress, or the legislature. Wisconsin also passed women's presidential suffrage in 1919, and Illinois had passed it in 1913. It was only after the 19th Amendment was ratified that women in Minnesota and other states had the door open to vote for all elected offices. But there were women in the United States who already had access to full voting rights prior to the 19th Amendment, and our focus on a story centered on the East Coast obscures that. 15 states, mainly in the West, established women's full voting access prior to the 19th Amendment, along with a dozen other states that allowed women to vote in presidential elections. In fact, the National Council of Women Voters, a nonpartisan coalition of women from these voting states, was established in 1911. It led women voters and fostered women's leadership and political engagement. It was a powerful coalition and the forerunner to today's League of Women Voters, which was created when the National Council of Women Voters merged with the National American Women's Suffrage Association following passage of the 19th Amendment. What we learn from the history of this long social movement that's still in process is that there is always more to the story. 1920 was not the finish line. In fact, the 19th Amendment did not guarantee women's right to vote. States make laws about who can vote, and the 15th and 19th Amendments only prohibited states from using race or sex as exclusionary categories for voters. States could still dream up lots of ways to disfranchise people, and they did, especially in southern states through the use of poll taxes, literary tests, and violence. Millions of Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color couldn't vote after 1920 in some states until the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 and the 1965 Voting Rights Act struck down many restrictive state voting qualifications. But problems remain. Today, we still see states creating ways to disfranchise people by requiring certain types of IDs, purging the voter rolls, barring people with felony record of voting, gerrymandering, or eliminating polling places that result in long lines that discourage or prevent participation. Women's voting access before and after the 19th Amendment has not been experienced equally, and there are long-lasting issues that need to be addressed. So our history is with us today, but history can inspire us to learn more and inspire us to activism after learning about the many diverse women leaders from the past. This was a movement made up of women who were white, Black, of color, Indigenous, or queer, and came from all walks of life. So let's acknowledge and honor the work of Black, Indigenous, and women of color who persisted and contributed to the women's rights and women's suffrage movement despite the odds against them. And find examples of women's political participation, leadership, and coalition building to see what worked or not, and use that to inspire our actions today. And let's keep thinking about how women's civic engagement drives community development and fosters women's economic self-sufficiency. Our suffragists from history would remind us that when more women vote and enter public leadership roles, they influence the discussion about what's valued in our society and everyone benefits. The 19th Amendment was one stop on the road, and we still have a way to travel. So I'm looking forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say on these issues.
That seems a perfect introduction into Congresswoman Moore. Gwen, would you now make some introductory remarks, please?
Thank you so much. And it's really great to follow the historian um, because they always set the tone and pace for what has happened. And so while Wisconsin, of course, was the first state to actually ratify the 19th Amendment. And Black women, as she pointed out, were part of that movement too. But, Black women were not enfranchised with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Fast forward, women may have Black women and women may have had the legal right to vote, but there have been so many barriers to voting for Black women and voter suppression in institutionalized ways. What I guess I want to talk about for my 2 minutes of fame here in my own personal journey and personal story is the psychological disenfranchisement, the bondage that women in general have felt about running for office and participating in politics despite their so-called freedom to do something. I mean, we have been told, I remember when I ran in 1988, knocking on doors, people saying, "Oh, I mean, you really sound good. You really sound like you've accomplished a lot. You sound educated. You sound perfect. Except who's going to take care of your kids while you're up there in Madison?" So, well, I have to take care of them whether I go to Madison or not. So I've gotten that figured out. I do know that, in our state here, about 3/4 of the electorate are women. And yet we don't feel that agency. We don't feel that power. It's so important to educate us as to what we can and cannot do. When I ran for office, I mean, people who I know loved me discouraged me. Oh, you're never going to be able to win. I mean, nobody's going to give any women money. And it is harder to raise money. It's harder to establish that credibility. It's harder to do. And, and my question was, by the time I was ready to run for Congress is, my God, I've already done the hardest thing ever, raising 3 kids on my own. This couldn't be as hard as that was. So I just didn't believe people when they said it was hard to do. And besides, in my stewardship, not only as a professional who organized the Community Development Credit Union, because, I had experienced getting ripped off by the finance companies that repossessed my washer and dryer, at usury rates, because I had experienced, what it meant to not live in a neighborhood with the sufficient property taxes so that my kids could go to the appropriate schools. I had experienced what it would be like not to have health insurance and to depend on Medicaid. I had experienced what it was like to go to a pantry to get food. I had experienced what it was like to have my electricity turned off and my gas turned off. And so I had experienced what it meant to make less than a man doing the same work and the same job. I had experienced all that. And so I brought that experience as being a woman into my stewardship. And so when I ran in 1988 and won the Democratic nomination and ultimately the seat to be state representative and go to the state assembly, what I said to myself is that, what? I'm not going to get stereotyped into just being a female and a woman. I'm going to show people that I am so broad in my thinking. And I was there on the floor about 10 minutes before I realized, oh, Gwen, God, you're a woman. They're trying to jack up the kids. They're trying to jack up women. I completely forgot my resolve not to be a woman because somebody had to do it. And that was why I was elected. I have so many other things to share. But I'll close by saying, look, I was dragged kicking and screaming into this profession. Dragged kicking and screaming because of my not knowing what my agency and my power was. People told me, "Go ahead, girl, you got to do it. You have to." And that was from my very first election in 1968 as president of the student council and president of the Wisconsin, vice president of the Wisconsin Association of Student Councils. Every step of the way, I was dragged kicking and screaming. When I ran for state representative, the current representative, who was a white former priest, recruited me. He was going to give the seat up. And he asked me, and I told him no. And he kept bugging me. And when I finally said yes, I started projectile vomiting all over the cafeteria. I could not, and yelling at my mother, who had said, "I want you to run for the state assembly," and saying to her, you know, you're not even alive. You're dead. Leave me alone. I don't want to run. And I've been elected ever since. So I yield back.
Wow. Good for your mother. Dorothy, got to follow the money, right? You followed it into our communities to help people like the congressman. Can you talk a little bit about your path?
Sure. So, you know, when we are growing up, we don't have the sense of, you know, what our purpose is in life. We were just enjoying the ride, right? We, you know, are really engaged with friends and relatives in our various different communities. One of the things that I was always very, very passionate about were numbers. While thinking about math and how to utilize numbers to solve problems and to be more logical and analytical and factual about, you know, the everyday thinkings of life. Numbers were just that, numbers. Like the congressman, throughout my growing years and in my adult life, there are so many examples where I think subconsciously I was thinking about finance and the way that money moves in various different sectors of our lives and how that money can be used to make a difference. My early years, I remember growing up and the banking system was non-existent for us in our communities.
That's right.
We actually borrowed money from loan sharks. We, you know, whenever we wanted to purchase anything and we didn't have the funds or the cash to do so, you know, we went to the various different retail stores and the service providers, and they actually financed what we needed. I remember my mother buying her first living room set, and she went to the store and came home, told us it was going to be delivered. And every Friday after my mother got paid and was home, someone would show up at our door collecting the cash and it was called buying things on time. And so witnessing the fact that there is a financial services system somewhere, but we are not a part of it, really intrigued me. So as I was going through school, though I didn't go into business or economics, my degree was in liberal arts at the University of Montana. I began to notice just how impactful a sound banking system and an inclusive banking system could be in various different communities. And so with my first job out of college into a bank in Missoula, Montana, not very many of us are there as Blacks, but Montana, by the way, really did play a very, very significant role in the suffrage movement. And I think women in Montana were allowed to vote a lot earlier than most of the other states as well. But in Montana, my first banking job, I was sitting at a desk and we were talking about mortgages. And there was a man that came in and he had just relocated from Montana from New York to Montana. And so he sort of made this inquiry and he says, you know, where are you from? And I explained where I was from, New Orleans, Louisiana. And he said, so what is your degree in? And I mentioned that it was in liberal arts, but I had a very, very strong passion for finance. And he looked at me and he said, oh, so that and a quarter will buy you a cup of coffee. So you should feel very lucky to be here. And so rather than be, upset or defensive about it, I use that as a motivating to really just start to shape what my purpose was. Being a banker, being in that profession, and needing to do the things that we did. So becoming a president and CEO of a community bank here in Minneapolis, we established a mission that we were to improve lives and to improve communities. But we were also on a mission to improve our margins, because no margin, no mission. And so really having an understanding about the fact that we can certainly help our communities, but we have to stay resilient, and we have to be sustainable in order to do that. And it required a good deal of civic engagement with any number of organizations who called this place home or our community. And so over the years, 40-something years in banking, it was always led with the fact that we needed to make sure that our communities were better off for our services.
Wow. McGee, you get to wrap it up here.
Thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure just listening to the other ladies here and their stories. I want to focus very much on the now as we look at civic engagement. I also want to thank the WBDC for putting this forum together to address the really criticalness of leadership and civic engagement at one of the most critical times, I can certainly say, in my lifetime and the lifetime of many others for sure. We're at a very pivotal time in deciding, what our future is going to look like for our families, for our communities, for our businesses, even for our democracy. But the one thing that's crystal clear and that I believe so much in is that women do have a strong say in the direction of the country, probably stronger than we realize on the surface. Because, let's face it, traditionally we've underestimated our value, we've underestimated the power of our voice. But now is not the time to be reticent about our value, our voice, or our power. Too much is at stake. Now is the time that we really have to be bold. When you consider, women are at the forefront of civic engagement. More women are registered to vote than men nationally. Women vote at a higher rate. Turnout is higher, and particularly Black women. I can't say enough about Black women, and I thank our historian for including Black women in her narrative about the history of suffrage, and also the Congresswoman's mention. But the one thing that I will add to those narratives is that the 19th Amendment, it was 5 decades before Black women were really able to experience the fullness of their right to vote. And even today, as we look at what's going on around us today in terms of suppression and other things, Voting Rights Act, we're still in that fight. We're still fighting for that right. But just generally, women as a whole really have some power in this whole narrative. When you look at the presidential election of 2016, more than 10,000 women than men actually voted in the election. When you look at the midterms that we just came out of 2 years ago, women voted, 55% of women voted versus 51% of men. So we have that tendency to be there, but I just don't think we realize what we have in terms of power behind our block, the block of women voting. And I'll also say, someone also mentioned prior to me about women getting into politics. And this is something that I am, so adamant and passionate about. In 2018, we saw 117 women elected to the Congress. and 42 of them were of color. At least 3 of them were LGBTQ. We saw 9 females elected to governorships. My point here is that we can make a difference with our vote, and we can make a difference with the abilities that we have to make a difference. And now really is the time for us to do that. Now, just a little bit, I want to take just a second here for some real straight talk. This is like sister to sister talk, right? Our real power is in how we exercise the privilege that we have to vote and how we use our money. I say to everyone, and I say this repeatedly on panels and just in talking one-on-one with friends and colleagues and others interested in getting more politically involved and astute. Our real power is our vote, and it's our money. And I'm an advocate for using both of them, if you will, to their fullest, wisely and to their fullest potential. Women drive 70 to 80% of consumer purchasing, either using their own money or influencing purchases. That's a lot of money when you think about it. But there's such disparity still between the pay between men and women. I love this whole thing that has come up recently about equal pay day, if you will. I love the idea of it because it really hits home the disparities that we see among all women versus pay for men. And what this actually takes a look at, it sums for you the number of months that it would take a woman to equal the same salary as a man, a male counterpart, right? So for white women who make 82% of the dollar that white men make, it takes them about 15 months for parity. Black women, 62 cents on the dollar versus white men. It takes us 20 months to make what a white man makes in 12 months. And when you look at Latinas, the situation is even more alarming. 54 cents on the dollar, and it takes a Latina 23 months to reach parity of her white counterpart. There are all of these types of disparities, and this is why getting active in the political arena and being active and running for office, all of these things help us solidify a stronger economic base for ourselves, our businesses, and our families and our communities. All of these are tied together. There's legislation pending now called the Paycheck Fair Act. Who knew, right? What if we mobilize, and what if we get behind it? And this is where I see women being very reticent with their voices. And this is where I'm encouraging women to be bold in those conversations and to reach out and to really make a difference. So, the whole reason to vote is that we need more people that are going to stand up for the things that are important to women and families in the country. And I think women can best do that. We need women business owners, particularly in the political arena. Thanks again for this platform to be able to talk about these issues. But, I want to end with, how do we really raise our voice, and how do we really raise the vote? Recognize, number one, many of us go to the polls, when it's a big election, but we have to realize the importance of the down ballot as well, and get to know local candidates and ask the hard questions and, put them on the spot, understand what's at stake and make them understand what our agendas are and what we need as business owners, as in many instances, African Americans women are 60% more likely to be heads of households. make them understand what the needs are, and then make a plan to vote. You know, this year is an unusual circumstances, and we've got to be sure that we're smart about how to get our vote and make it count and matter. So you have to make a plan to vote. You know, if you haven't already requested an application here in Illinois, you know, go do that. You know, vote by mail, early voting, whatever it is. And don't just do this plan for yourself. Help 5 to 10 other people make a plan, because that's the way we get full participation. You know, form clusters of friends and colleagues, form coalitions, if you will. Right now, I'm working with a group of women, and we're forming something that's called Multi-Generational Women for the Vote. We want to join arms with young women and get them involved. And that's, you know, one of the other critical things. We've got to get young people interested in voting, and we've got to help them understand that their votes do matter. And finally, after election, you know, women, and particularly Black women in this regard, are so good about mobilizing and getting out to vote, but it doesn't stop there. Once people are elected, we've got to hold them accountable. And just like we mobilize to get the vote out, we've got to promote policy, and we've got to hold people accountable for the promises that they've made, and for the things to ensure that community needs are met. So in closing, I'll just say our voice is our vote, so let's use it.
That is so incredibly inspiring. I almost want to stop the conversation now. But one of the comments that, just to sort of bookend this, that the Congresswoman made was that women don't feel a sense of agency.
Yeah. Right.
And McGee, to bookend it, what you are calling for is for women to not only feel the sense of agency, but to use it.
But to use it because it's there. We don't feel it.
How do we let them know that?
Pardon me, Ellen?
How do you let women know that? How do you go from don't feel it to use it?
You know, I think it comes with examples, if you will. You know, like I mentioned, you know, we saw a huge turnover in the Congress. We saw more women elected. You know, we saw women that looked like us, you know, taking office. That's a prime example of, you know, that we have voice when we come together. When we come together and we combine our collective power, if you will, we see results. And there are times after times that we're seeing that. And if we can show those examples, and sometimes it's, you know what, sometimes it's almost like therapy, helping us. I remember when I was coming up in the industry, you know, you were always I would go to meetings, and I always, mind you, I'm a country girl from Columbus, Georgia. I was always felt that the other folks in the room were smarter than me. Well, hell no, they weren't. I found that out. I found that out. And I found that out, you know, through just experiences. No, you know, they weren't the smartest people in the room. There were many of us that had equal ability. And this is what women have to understand about their own agency and their own political power. It's there, we just have to use it. And sometimes we need that repeated to us. You know, we need to sometimes hear it over and over again. We need to be our sister's keeper. We need to pat each other on the back, and we have to prop each other up and help us understand that that power is there.
So Ellen, I'm not sure if we, you know, are doing the round robin or not, but I want to interject something here. And McGee, you so eloquently explained how we need to move forward with this. I think what our young, that multi-generational Women for the Vote is so vitally important, because there's so much noise in such a complex a complexity around this issue of getting engaged and getting involved that younger women tend to say, you know, I'm not interested in all of that. That was what my mother and my grandmother did. But today's young women, they need to understand that they're standing on some pretty broad shoulders. And they're inheriting a bigger opportunity than any other generation in the past that's come before them. And as guardians of this, I implore them not to squander it with being complacent or to show apathy about the process, because in the past, and they've witnessed that, you know, we are not represented in this. This is, you know, for whatever reasons, this is for the privileged, not for the rest of us. It's for the people who are in the older generation. This is their fight, not ours. Bringing that collective together is something that I think we as women need to really align ourselves and collaborate with all sectors of the female population. You know, and during my, you know, background in history, I wrote a paper about Shirley Chisholm running for president back in 1976. She's one of my heroes. And to listen to her speeches about the necessity for women to collaborate together, that there will be a time where Black women and white women and Native women and Asian women to come together to really, really hammer out a common agenda in order to move us forward, because there's strength in numbers. There's that empowerment. She talked about, you know, sort of reading the history where people talked a great deal about the women's suffrage and how in the early days of women's suffrage, there was the bartering and the concessions that were being made, that women would get the vote if Blacks didn't get the vote. Women felt that they deserved to vote more than Blacks did. And so that stuff, while we can still acknowledge that that's a historical piece of women's suffrage, we move beyond that and we build this coalition together. One of my most favorite reads is by Sojourner Truth, when she spoke about Ain't I a Woman?
Yeah.
And the fact that as a mother of 13, watching all of her children being sold into slavery, how she really, really felt, I'm a woman too. And that, you know, this notion that women can't have as much rights as men, and some of the rhetoric was the use of religion, you know, because Christ wasn't a woman. And her response were, well, where did Christ come from? From God and from a woman. Man had nothing to do with it. So, you know, once we ground ourselves in things like that, and intellect has nothing to do with it as well. And so that welcomes everybody. And I think that that's one of the linchpins that we really do need to make bigger and bigger and bigger in this movement to get more women and multi-generational, not only multi-generational, but multinational, multicultural, behind a common agenda.
Yeah. And
You know,
Dorothy,
I just think that, you know, in my experience is that women just don't realize how much housework is involved in this profession of politics. You know, I mean, who was the one that figured out that the pajamas were flammable? I mean, it was women that found that out. Who's the person that cleans the refrigerator out, to, you know, clean the experiments out so that people don't get sick? Who's the first person to notice that people are sick and they need to go to the doctor? Makes men take that test that they don't want to take. Who's the person that shops for the house to make sure it's in a school district where property taxes will support good schooling? All of this, who pays the bill? You know, so that while the narrative, the sociological narrative is that men are the strong ones. I mean, you know, who better to serve on the school board than a woman? I mean, we're first educators. Who better to be in charge of the agency, consumer protection laws than women? I mean, we're those people who know that. You know, some of my favorite stories involving other legislators, like Jan Schakowsky from Chicago, is one of my dearest, closest friends. And every time I go to the grocery store, I say, thank you, Jan Schakowsky, because long before she was ever a member of Congress, she got together with a few women, you know, who were concerned about there being no expiration dates on the food. You just didn't know how long, when the food was produced, how far it had traveled, and they fought, against the industries, of course, and got expiration dates on food. I mean, I rely on these expiration dates, and I think of her every time I go to the grocery store, every time I clean it out. We talked about the Violence Against Women Act. Of course, I was the key advocate, a key legislator to get the Violence Against Women Act over the finish line a couple of sessions ago. And I mean, the Violence Against Women Act, something that, of course, Joe Biden was author of. It had been something that, had passed year after year after year, just kind of a yawner, with huge numbers of supporters. This particular year, it had, when I was the author of it, we were trying to get LGBTQ rights, because we found that lesbians who were faced violence couldn't get into shelters, couldn't find housing. Native American women, because of the legal Oliphant decisions, they were subject 10 times as much to violence as other women. And when we wanted to protect immigrants who were being held hostage by their immigrant status, boy. So what did we do? We called all the women up. Say, hey, y'all, come on. And I mean, we had LGBTQ, Native Americans. I mean, they just came from every part of the country. We had the domestic violence folk doing it. And I think a lot of times women just don't have any idea, that they are the experts on education, on health, and they should be in the room. And you talked about Shirley Chisholm, bring a folding chair to the table. And so we still have to remind women that we are the powerful people, and so I think we have to sort of come out of the closet too, and we have to own our power. We don't have agency because we just don't own it.
Right. Yeah.
I want to go to Dr. Moore. Kristen, when the suffragettes were putting their clubs together, it seemed to me they were convincing men of their agency, and now we're convincing women of their agency. Is that right?
Actually, I would push back on that, because I think one of the themes that's emerging from this discussion is this moment that we're in that is so similar to the moment that our ladies from the 19th and early 20th century found themselves in when they were building these clubs and associations. They wanted to figure out not only how to improve themselves, but improve the women in their social circles and in their home communities. And in improving themselves and their, group of 10 friends, they could then improve their cities. They could improve their neighborhoods. And so they were trying to figure out, how could we create these associations so that we could support and encourage the women that are now in these groups, learning about these issues, to start taking on more public leadership roles. Maybe it would start small, encourage them to present a paper to the group. Then it would be, well, you did that really great research on that little paper that you presented to this group. You got some public speaking. Let's go talk to a legislator. So, they would build on these kinds of things, and they were talking to each other. They were talking to men as well. But these clubs and associations that were focused on women's rights and women's suffrage were really focused on building up a community of women so that they could then go and create partnerships with other communities of women on like-minded issues. So, like the Pure Food campaign or the Urban Sanitation campaign. That was many different clubs and associations who ended up getting together. It eventually flowered into what we now call the municipal housekeeping movement, where women said, what affects my home is affected by the community. And so things like what Congresswoman Moore is bringing up about the food label expiration dates, I mean, these were things that women were engaged in, 100 years ago, because they wanted to make sure that the milk that was delivered wasn't adulterated. so that their children wouldn't get sick from the milk that they had to buy in the cities because they weren't living out on the farms. So that idea of how do we create these groups of people to support and encourage and learn, I think is something that we can really look to history about examples of how women were doing that and get excited about that. That's probably an aspect of American history that few students learn about. You know, and so I always encourage my students, go out and learn about what the women in your communities were doing throughout history. You know, what were those club women in Chicago involved in? You know, how were they improving their neighborhoods, improving their communities, teaching people to use the franchise once that door opened. The other strong theme I think that comes through is money. And our women in history recognized that was so important. So these clubs and associations helped women understand money, organizational budgets, how money was used in businesses and corporations. And, you know, that then helped women think about, oh, I actually could run a business. Or, oh, I see what this legislative law is asking us to do. The other side of the money is, how do you use that money to support initiatives that women find are important? And so many of these clubs and associations from past times were directly responsible for raising and distributing the funds that have resulted in so many of our welfare, arts, other kinds of institutions that we rely on today. Hospitals is just one, museums, schools. So there are many things that we can look to, and I always encourage everyone, go back and find out what your history is, because the easiest way to erase a culture is to erase its history. And so when women's culture doesn't have a history, or people don't know that accurate history of women in America, how do we collect ourselves together? So I really encourage people to go out and find more. Start local. Start with your state. Start with your city, and don't worry about those old white ladies from New York, because you know what? There was a lot of stuff going on in the Midwest and the West and other parts of the country with some really kind of badass women activists, and we need to be promoting their stories so that young people can get excited and you know, find their Shirley Chisholm, you know, find the person that inspires them, and then they can take that and move on to greater action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the pieces of that is really lifting each other up. I remember reading during the suffrage movement, especially in the state of Colorado, and how the women band together, including African-American women.
Yep.
There was a woman, Elizabeth Ansley, who owned a newspaper, African-American newspaper. And, you know, she went door to door and she really spread the gospel about the suffrage movement and the women's right to vote. And so those are the kinds of stories that I think if we can just drag with us to the present to help us really learn and inform and continue, we're moving to a higher plane of this kind of coalition and building common ground. But we cannot forget, again, the shoulders of the women, the broad shoulders of the women who came before us. I mean, there is a whole lot to be said for what they went through.
And I want to add something to your Colorado example. I'm so excited you brought that up, because in 1893, Colorado was the first state to give women full voting access as a result of a popular vote. And it was a direct result of the coalition building across race, ethnic, and class lines. Those women in Colorado were able to build that successful endeavor. And they actually did it without a whole lot of help from Susan B. Anthony and the NAWSA, because Ellis Meredith, who was one of the chairs of the Colorado campaign, went to ask for money from the national organization. And NASA said, yeah, we don't think Colorado is that big of a deal. It's not really going to work out. And they're like, okay, we'll do it on our own. And so Colorado built that coalition. They got it done. And they were incredibly successful. And they were among the founding members of the National Council of Women Voters.
Yeah,
And now, just to bring that to the present, because I'm in Colorado, there is an organization called Women Electing Women, and it
I'm
brings,
sorry, you cut out.
You faded out, Ellen.
oh, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Women Electing Women is a Colorado organization that brings women together to support women running for the Senate or governor's races all over the country. And I think that's a great model. I want to end with this notion of supporting each other, because, you know, mythology has it that women don't work together,
That's right.
don't support each other. If each of you, and this is gonna be the hardest part, in about 30 seconds, can just speak to the support you've gotten from other women and the support you give to other women. I know you could go for hours on this, but it's not.
30 seconds. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Emily's list. I would not be a member of Congress.
Awesome. Dorothy?
Yeah, so my support has come from women throughout my entire life, from my mother up to the woman who gave me my first professional job as a banker. I certainly wouldn't have built a 40-year career in this space were it not for women.
Mine start with my mother. My mother was one of the most courageous women. And then I went to Spelman College, and I had nurturing there through just any host of teachers. And coming into the professional world, I had two amazing female mentors.
Kristen?
Well, and I would say certainly my mother and my auntie and all of those women throughout history who fought for women's access to collegiate coeducation that allowed me to get the education that I received.
You all are
And so since I didn't take my whole 30 seconds, I certainly have to mention my mother, as you know, who bugged me, to run long before the seat was even open. But also people like Vel Phillips, who was the first African-American to win statewide. We have Mandela Barnes, who won just last year, and she mentored him as well. And she just insisted that I run for Congress, and she, God rest her soul, she was the honorary chair of my committee to support me. So I've been supported by women too in my entire career.
I really want to thank each of you, and I really want to thank all of you, because you have really shared your leadership journeys, your passion. You've inspired all of us to create our own legacies and shared who helped you create yours. To our audience, thanks for listening to today's conversation. We hope this conversation has left you inspired. I don't see how it couldn't. We hope it's provided insights into how each of you can raise your own voice and your vote. We hope that you believe that it's important to accelerate these opportunities for women, minorities, and all diverse communities. Mainly, we hope that you'll join in this important effort to raise up the vote.
Raise your hands up. Raise them up. Hey. Come on, come on. Listen to what I say.
I'm going to introduce our panel. Let's start with Maria Reagan Gonzalez, who is the mayor of Richfield. Thank you for being with us today. Next, Natalie McGrady, who is the director of supplier diversity at Cargill. Thank you for joining us. Kenya McKnight Ahad, who is the CEO and founder of the Black Women's Wealth Alliance. And Yao Ya, who is the executive director of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to kick us off and ask each of you to discuss a little bit and reflect about, your origin story. Were there defining moments that helped shape who you have become today? I'm going to go left to right through my screen, and I'm going to start with Maria.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. And it's really fun and an honor to be on a panel with such amazing, powerful women. And I look forward to meeting them in person. So the question was around the defining moments that that really influenced me in my upbringing. I'll say I'm a proud biracial Latina. My dad is from Mora, Minnesota. He grew up on a dairy farm, one of 5 kids. They went to school at a farm school in the country. And my mother is an immigrant from Mexico City, from Nesa, Ciudad Nesa, which is one of the most dangerous and low-income areas of Mexico City. And she was one of 10 kids. And so I just grew up with very much living in 2 different cultures, very much rooted in working families and the struggle of working in low-income families. And we were raised to be told that because we were US citizens alone, we were in a much better position than the rest of my family. And that was a privilege, but that it was also our responsibility to do everything we could to use that privilege to make the world around us better. And so that's how I was, that's how I was raised. And everything we did was rooted in that core principle. And being biracial has helped me be kind of a catalyst between people with different opinions and ways of thinking. And I do think that my upbringing was very influential in getting me to where I am today.
Okay, thank you for sharing that story. Yeah, same question for you.
Yes, an honor to share my experience. For me, I am Hmong American, first generation. My parents immigrated from the Thai refugee camps to America in 1985. So I was born not too long after that in California, and being the number 7 of 8 kids, that played a huge role in my life because I always had older siblings to look after me while my parents were working. So very close family. And then my father was also a leader of the clan of the Ya family. So he was very charismatic and inspiring. My mother was always on top of the gossip of the community. So, you know, they were just very, very well-knitted people in the community. They were really highly respected within the community. So I definitely had both my parents as role model figures in my life. And with that being said, being Hmong American in St. Paul in Minnesota is very different, was a very life-changing experience. I went to school with so many diversity, right? I can count how many white people were in my class. That's the reality that I lived in. I grew up with siblings that were at the time glued to the TV because we didn't have technology like we do today, right? So we were very, very inspired by stories, and we will watch the TV all day and find our way to watch Japanese anime. And I personally love Japanese anime that have, you know, strong female lead figures, and they were very inspiring, such as Miyazaki's movies, Princess Mononoke, Nausicaa of the Valley. They feature very strong young women who had to make really hard decisions, coming of age and saving the world, and what was the relationship with nature and human. So that played a huge role in my life, and really did shape the person that I am today.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, Kenya, you're next.
So I'm originally from a small city, Kankakee, Illinois. Although I grew up here in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, to be specific, for the past 35 years. So I had the honor of being shaped by my great and my great and my grandmother. So 3 generations of my grandmothers who were alive and able to influence my values and who I am as a person. And my great grandmother, more specifically, who raised 4 generations of my family. I have over 50-something first cousins. And so we grew up in a very collective, cooperative, not about you space. It's about everybody. And we were taught to be human beings, decent, good human beings who were accountable for what we did. We were taught to work hard. My grandmother was an entrepreneur. She was a candy store lady, neighborhood, right? So she made her own ice cream, icy cups, sold candy, her own pies and cakes, and sold them. And she put all of her great grands to work and being her helpers in the store. So had a paper route at 7. We were recycling, collecting glass and cans at 8, 7, taking them to the junkyard to get money. So we had to work. And then we had to go to church and vacation Bible school every Sunday and every summer. So we were children with responsibility. And I grew up in a community back home that was very segregated. So I didn't see people who weren't Black necessarily. And I actually didn't know I was Black until I moved to Minnesota. So because your community looks like you, from the corner stores to the doctors to the teachers to, it was just that kind of a community as a young person. So growing up with a strong sense of pride of who I am as a person, with accountability, with entrepreneurship at the front of, folks working hard, creating hustles, to survive. And my grandmother owning property. We still have her property in our family through generations. And just Southern people, right? I'm the second generation of my family born out of the South, Mississippi. And so that was my foundation, which became my guiding light through my life, and it still is today. And that helped shape my identity, my values. It influences the work I do, why I care about Black women being economically stable and prosperous. There's a bunch of Black women, although she was married, but we have a lot of women in our family. And then Minneapolis, that's a different story. I grew up in a very different reality without our family here. My mom, I have 9 siblings, so 5 of us with my mom and 4 outside of us. And I'm the matriarch of my family. That's the role and position I play. And it was just a different reality here, of poverty, of struggle, of pain, of a lot of things that I didn't get to experience back at home. So and that light from my great grandmother is what helped me get through and be, I guess, strong enough to create the reality I sit in today, which is the Black Women's Wealth Alliance and the life I continue to build for myself and my community and family.
Thank you. Natalie?
Yes, hi, good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Natalie McGrady, and I do lead supplier diversity at Cargill. I also have a lot of excitement and perspective around, women and children and families, and how do we start to work with the group of those organizations or those children to make sure they have an opportunity to succeed. And I think voting is one of those areas. And so when we think about, how I was raised, I'm the youngest of 6 children, all girls. Grew up in a small upstate town called Corning, New York, where we are, I think very much like Kenya, our entire street was Black up to a certain point. So you walk, you're walking up the street, there's, white families at the bottom of the hill, and up the hill is all Black people on two streets primarily in Corning, and that's how I grew up. And we all knew each other, we all went to church together, our families were all friends, I had cousins that lived there, but you would go out into the community because all the stores and everything were in the town. So growing up in Corning was a very different experience than, other people had. And my parents both worked for large corporations. And so they were, my father worked for Corning Incorporated, my mother worked for Ingersoll Rand. And both, my mother went to a historically Black college and university, Tuskegee University. And out of the 6 girls, I went to a historically Black college as well. And my father was never educated. He went to, he had his GED. So, but we're both very much into civil rights for our community. and making sure that everyone had an equal opportunity to succeed. And so I think that's what I think about how I was raised and what I believe in. I was there during all the conversations that they had with their friends. My parents started a biracial social club back in the 60s, before I was born. And part of that social club was to talk about the treatment of Blacks in Corning and how they, when people move into Corning, where they live, because there was redlining in Corning. And so making sure that there was only certain areas where Black people could live. And I remember them celebrating when Black people were able to move outside of South Corning into other parts of the city. And so all of that is so important when you think about your voting and where you vote and how you vote. It's more local, and I think Mayor Gonzalez can tell us all about that. The local voting is just as important as the national voting and the state voting. And so my parents proved that to me at a very young age. And my father actually went to the March on Washington and took my oldest sister with him. I was too young. I wasn't even born yet, but I remember them talking about it. But when Shirley Chisholm ran as the first Black woman to run for president, she came. My father was a delegate, and I got to give her flowers. So that's my earliest memory. I was 6 years old and able to give Shirley Chisholm flowers as she stepped off the plane in Corning, New York. So I'm very passionate about our right to vote.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. And, you know, I think there's some clear themes that I can draw out from all of your stories. Strong women in your lives who have influenced and shaped who you are, family, your broader community, and the importance of strong values that have shaped you. So now let's build on, you know, the foundations that helped shape you and move into what helped shape, and we've touched on this a little bit, but your career. What influenced you into taking a career either in business or of you? And what struggles did you face there? I think again, we'll start with Maria.
So I don't come from the political world. I was a person who voted and who donated to candidates that I liked, but I had never, before running for office, I had never knocked on a door for any political candidate. And I was not a part of a party formally or anything like that. I voted, and that was it. But, you know, in 2014, Michael Brown was killed by police. In 2015, Jamar Clark was killed. And it's just been a long history of African-American men being killed by police and community members of color. And that was very influential in my decision to decide to run, as was, I work a lot in public policy, so I have a full-time job, and I was in grad school also, and I just finished grad school after going to school part-time for 5 years. I got my master's in public health. But in the Latino community, as many of us know, because we have community members that are undocumented, people are treated like animals, people are used and abused, and we had been fighting to incorporate access to healthcare in the state of Minnesota before the Affordable Care Act passed. We wanted to ensure that all Minnesotans, regardless of income status, could have access to healthcare. That did not pass in Minnesota, nor did it pass at the national level. So today, people who are undocumented still do not have the crucial access they need. And after losing that battle, and after just going to march and marching, and the Black Lives Matter movement was really growing, I just turned to my husband in bed one night and I said, I can't do this anymore. I cannot go to another march. I cannot sit here and just do what I'm doing. I have to change my life. I have to make huge radical sacrifices, because right now, and there continues to be, a silent and a very explicit war on communities of color. And I just said, I have to do something. My mom and my aunties and the ancestors before me didn't fight and sacrifice their lives so that I could just sit here and not fight my struggle. So I said, I guess, I want to run for office, and I think I have a lot to contribute. And at the time, I was working for the city of Richfield in their public health department. And I had really learned, wow, first of all, Richfield, like many communities across the state, are so diverse and is so diverse in so many ways, and that there is this disconnect between the people who are serving and leading the community and who the community really is. And there also oftentimes tends to be a lot of interest in bridging those gaps, but people might not know how. There's these systems that are meant to keep people separated. And again, as a biracial, bicultural person, I was kind of able to see some of that potential and decided to run for office. And everyone made so much fun of me. They said, you're never gonna win. There's a person that's groomed and ready to be the next in line. She's a part of the party. You're a nobody. You're young, you don't have any kids. You've been here for like 5 years. You're never gonna make it. And I said, I don't care. I don't care. It's not about winning or not winning. It's about doing something bigger and really taking the sacrifices and doing the transformation for myself and with my community to make change. And if we don't win, we learn something and we build community. And if I win, I don't even want to think about what will happen. Let's not talk about it. And when everyone told me that I would never make it, and I had all of these people who had not endorsed me or supported me, except for the communities of color, except for seniors, except for people with disabilities, immigrants and refugees in my community, I was able to win with 58% of the vote when people said I didn't even stand a chance. So that is what inspired me. And I'm very thankful for that compass, that North Star compass that my mother, that my family gave me, because fortunately or unfortunately, we all know what it means to be told we're not good enough. And luckily, I have had strong women in my life to show me that regardless of that, I am worthy and I am strong and powerful.
Thank you, Maria. Congratulations. It's a great story. Yao, same question for you.
I just want to say, big fan of you, Maria. Amazing work that you've done. Just keep up the good work. So for me, professional experience, right after college, I knew I wanted to be a farmer. I said to myself, I wanted to be a farmer. And my mom looked at me, she said, you went to college for 4 years and you want to be a farmer? And I said, yes, I think that is the profession that I want to do. And she just laughed it off. She just thought it was the funniest thing, and she didn't know how serious I was. But I was very serious about it. And so I said to myself, I don't know how to farm. I know there are a lot of Hmong farmers out there though, so I can learn from them. Luckily, I landed on a job at the Minnesota Hmong Hmong American Farmers Association, and I started working with many Hmong farmers. And one of my first tasks was to help build relationships with buyers. And the whole mission of HAFA, Hmong American Farmers Association, is to build wealth in generations of these Hmong farmers, because for so long they've been Hmong farmers and yet they don't have the same wealth as other farmers in the Twin Cities. And there's a lot of reasons to that. And I didn't learn how complicated it was until almost 3.5 years into the job, where I got completely burnt out. And I said to myself, how am I supposed to be a farmer if it's so hard for these Hmong farmers today to actually make a living? And I said to myself, there's got to be a way out of this. There's got to be a way to actually change this, because I'm working endlessly trying to create relationships and trying to make sales for these farmers, but it's still not enough. And I kept bumping into the same issue. Whenever I meet a buyer, they will always say, oh, do you have this liability insurance? Do you have the certification? You have all of these, because we can only work with you if you have these checked off. And it became very clear that the way how it was created wasn't for our small farmers. It was for bigger farmers. And a 5-acre farmer can't compete with a 3,000 acre. So it became very obvious that there was a lot of issues in our buying system. So I said to myself, what can I do about that? And it became very evident that I needed to know how to influence policymakers. And that's how I got involved with the chamber, because who else better knows how to do that in the most nonpartisan and most compelling way that still bridges businesses to other businesses, right? And I completely fell in love with the idea of what chambers do for businesses and for the community. It's been a journey, because now I definitely understand how I play in this whole infrastructure and in our community. And I felt very sad that in my Hmong community, we didn't have a robust chamber. And I wanted to bring that back to my community, because my community was lacking that. And I felt that we weren't in these conversations that other chambers were doing with other businesses. So I'm really, really glad that I am in the position I am today. Without working at the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, I would have never gotten my position at the Minnesota Hmong Chamber of Commerce. And it's been extremely profound. I've gotten to work with so many businesses in a short amount of time. And I really, really see that there's great opportunity, especially right now with COVID-19, civil unrest. We need to have a good balance of businesses and policymakers and bridging those relationships so that we can actually continue our commerce more than ever. Because right now we're heading towards something very scary that we don't know. And I believe that this is what we can do to really drive our economy. And those are some of the reasons why I have really changed my profession in a short amount of time, because I still plan to be a farmer, but I just have to take a detour while I'm at it.
I love that. I love that you still have the same dream and ambition. It's great. Kenya, same question for you, focusing on your career.
So let's see. I think the best way for me, I guess, to sum it up is to say that I was born into this through generations, of Black people, not just my family. And so we all kind of have to participate in our liberation in some way or the other. So any advancement that we make is about the collective, most of all, for me, although we have our individual things we strive for. So coming from where I come from and, being cultivated through the culture and values that I have, it was inevitable that I would be involved in something that was about Black people for me. And so I look back. So I did run for office as well in 2009 for Fifth Ward City Council, North Minneapolis, and I don't like to say I'm political, but the reality is that I am. I have that as part of my profile, and I've been working hard to ground my profile in the economic business space that I'm in. But there's a long history of the political piece, because you got to have fire starters, right? Folks who can kick up dust and, push and bust through walls when needed and how. And so that's sort of the role I played as the accountability factor when I step in a room politically. And so for me, I can look back and see that my great grandmother I didn't know this until I was in politics, but was a housing activist, advocate, affordable housing. And then she had us in protests. And so we see pictures of ourselves holding signs and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. So when I say it was kind of baked, those are the things that, you know, were happening in my childhood that kind of birthed this, became activist and now this economic leader with Black women. So I just knew that from my experience working in politics and in community development, I've, you know, worked for business agencies. I've done a lot of different things over 20 years that I've been involved in my local community. And the thing that I knew to be true in the end, I think post my Bush Fellowship, was that, you know, we're playing a different game as, you know, than white folks, as Black people on the economic scale. And particularly in doing more research around Black economics, I found that Black women were carrying a lot of the financial power in the Black community because we control nearly 60% of the dollar, yet we have the least assets, right? And, you know, ownership of, you know, assets, be it homes, investment, you know, stocks, bonds, and retirement accounts, and we're projected to retire in a higher poverty rate than all women. And so I'm looking at all these things. I'm looking at the $1.4 trillion buying power that Black people have in this country. And it's not making sense to me. Poverty just doesn't make sense when given, you know, the sort of, you know, power we have with our spending, but then also the reality of what our disparities are. But then when I look at, I started doing research around the, you know, just the history of Black economics, I saw that there was something that I think is quiet, which is what I called economic, over 400 years of economic oppression, right? That has been very consistent, like where there's a history of white violence and system violence towards Black economics. And so it's no mistake then that we're in this situation. When you look at that history of, you know, we think the oppression, we think of it as just, you know, this moral thing of, you know, white folks not liking Black. No, there's an economic factor here. Ida B. Wells pointed that out very clearly, that the lynchings in the South were connected to Black male entrepreneurs, right? We can look at Black Wall Street, we can look at the behavior of Bakes and, you know, all these systems. And I thought, you know, we got some financial trauma going on, you know, that's not being addressed. And, you know, we're really conservative people. My grandfather, great-grandfather was a Republican, you know, so Black folks are, in my opinion, really conservative at heart. We're hard on ourselves. We care about what's happening, and we think it's all our fault why we, you know, are not at a certain place. But what's been silent is this economic oppression. And so, I should say that, you know, again, remember my entrepreneurial background with family, you know, and pride. I care about, you know, our community and what's happening, but I also worked in transportation. And so you're looking at things from a 20, 50, sometimes 100-year span when you're dealing with transportation planning, finance, etc. And what I can see clearly is how my community was doing this in a circle, right? At a 10-foot level, and how the white community was doing this. They were pivoting at a 50 or 100% level because of how they aligned their businesses and strategies with government and opportunities that we're just not even clear on. So for me, then, combination of all of that background, my experiences, I knew that the game we need to be focused on is wealth building and what that looks like through generations of our family. And part of how we're going to make a significant impact is by dealing with the women who control the money, because the nation rises no higher than its woman. And the conditions of the Black woman will always dictate the conditions of the Black nation because of our position and who we are in our families, which is different across other communities, which is structured differently. And so then my focus shifted to that, and to getting Black women to think about the long term and how to maximize on our value proposition, how to take the money that we're influencing to begin to invest in securing the future for ourselves, for our children, and generations of our family. Even if you're married, how to spend your husband's money properly, you know, in a way that advances your family. So that became my work. It is my work. It's difficult work. I had to learn a lot about it. I knew very least about it. But it has taught me a lot over the years, and I'm still building and trying to figure it out. But I am inspired by generations of Black women in my family, but in this country, who have worked and fought hard for us to be in a stable, prosperous situation. So that is what powers me. And most of all, the history of Black economics in this country, about no matter how hard we've been fought against and oppressed, we have never given up, right? To fight for our right to own businesses, to own houses, to work jobs. Like, we die for these things, but we're still in that space, not giving up. And so I can't give up. I have to figure out how to do this. So that's my work.
Thank you, Kenya. Natalie, we'll wrap up this question with you.
Yeah, so I'm, very traditional corporate America. Went to school for accounting, went to an HBCU, like I said. And so we were pretty much groomed in our business school to go to corporate America. And so that's what I did. And like I said, I'm the youngest of 6 girls, and 4 of us worked in corporate America. 2 were teachers. And, I've risen probably as high as one of my other sisters, or maybe a little bit higher as it relates to status and position within the corporate culture. So my parents, that was their dream, to make sure all their girls were educated and they were able to go on. And, along the way, I would have little detours of, activism. So, when I was at Hampton University, it was during the time of apartheid in South Africa. So remember, being on campus and protesting and being in trouble for protesting. And, that was part of who I was. I always was thinking about how we could be better and do better by all of us. And then when I fast forward my career, starting in accounting and then moving into purchasing, that was in the 90s, where it was a push for diversity in the workplace. And when we talked about diversity in the 90s, we talked about diversity with Black people, Hispanic people. So, the traditional kind of government rules around what diversity looks like in the workplace. And I remember being in Virginia in one of those sessions where a white man, a colleague of mine, said to me, I watch Jeopardy and I watch these shows where Black people win cars. And I say, that guy doesn't need a car. And I was like, why would Black people not need a car? Why can't a Black person win a car? I mean, it was just unbelievable to me that someone would think that a person, a Black man, didn't deserve to win a car. And he didn't have an answer for me. And I thought, boy, this racism thing is for real. These are people I worked side by side of. So I became pretty active in that point with an organization at my old company called the Black Professionals Society, or Society of Black Professionals. And I just carried that every place I went. And I thought that, at work, you have to be just as authentically Black as you are at home. And I don't code switch at work. And I know a lot of people do because they feel like they need to, but I also had the benefit of growing up in a family where I didn't see my parents code switch. And so they would be who they were all the time. And we had friends of every race, every ethnic background you can imagine. My parents did, and would have parties and people over. So I grew up in a very different way. And my father, like I said, had a high school degree and went on to be a director at a Fortune 500 company. And his whole job was connecting the community and the corporation, making sure that everyone had an equal opportunity. And he was director of community relations. And it didn't matter what color they were and what their background was. If they were being discriminated against, he would fight for that. And my mother right alongside of him. So as I went through my corporate life, and I never wanted to have the Black job, the diversity job. I wanted to be outside of it. And here I am, 28 years later in what I would call the Black job in diversity. And the opportunity that is given me to to speak about the disparity of economic development, in which Kenya was talking about, in the Black community and all communities of color, is very important. So when I look at Cargill and what we spend with diverse suppliers and thinking about how do we grow that, how do we make have inclusion goals, have more exposure to how we think about diversity, not only just in workforce, but it's also in the supply chain, because that's where the economic impact happens as well. Those businesses hire people, those businesses spend in the communities. So how do we do that? And so I think it's interesting that I now have this Black job, I call it, that I can have such an impact in the communities which we work and live in.
Thank you, Natalie. All right, I'm going to switch gears a bit, shifting from stories of origin, what shaped your career, to the topic of advocacy and allyship. And obviously, like, those topics are really at the forefront of, you know, our country, certainly at Target right now. And I think what you sometimes see is, while the intentions are good, sometimes there's unintended consequences, because the burden is sometimes put on people of color to say, help us figure this out. So I'd love if you all, instead of educating us on how to get it right, if you could share examples of where you've seen advocacy or allyship done right, and or an example of wrong, even though the intentions were good. Maria, let's start with you again.
In terms of where allyship has been done right in my life, I think we've all probably had experiences where it's been done poorly and then really done in an intentional way. And I do think at the root of it, it's about, where does your intentionality come from? And you have to have a certain level of self-awareness to even understand that. And so I think when allies want to be an ally to make themselves feel better that they're doing something, that is not a good place to come from, and can oftentimes lead to unintentional consequences, like tokenizing and patronizing and this kind of white savior complex. And so that, you know, takes many forms, and that's in an approach that's kind of rooted in making myself as an ally feel better, like I'm doing something, and it's not coming from a very strong, grounded and rooted place. I have been really fortunate to be who I am today because of so many awesome, powerful, fierce women of color and white women. And I'll tell you, one of my mentors, her name is Maggie. She's a small business owner and consultant here in the Twin Cities. She grew up in a difficult home, very similar to the family dynamics that I have grown up with. That was very difficult, with a lot of different kind of substance use and abuse and many other issues, mental health issues. And so she kind of had some of those things that she had learned on her own journey, and she kind of shared her path with me, and she just wanted to get to know me. She didn't have a goal. She didn't take me on as her project. She just wanted to build an authentic relationship with me. When I was in college, I was a sophomore in college, and she just got to know me. We built a relationship, and she taught me very concrete things, but it was always based in what I was looking for and what I needed, and kind of she would help me distill those things. So she taught me how to negotiate a salary. She taught me how to fight for myself and defend myself. She taught me how to respect myself and how to stand up for myself. She said, oh, you want to practice public speaking? Well, I'm actually looking for a facilitator for the conference, and I can't have you say no. And then all of a sudden, I was facilitating a conversation for the first time in my life in front of 200 people, a group of 200 people. And she just kind of threw me in, but it was always enough to just get me at that growing edge and help me learn and grow where it was very uncomfortable. But it was always a very appropriate, beautiful relationship. And that's one example of just coming from a place of really authentically wanting to get to know somebody, their story, and having that connection. And when you come from that place, these things kind of emerge organically. And then another person that I was an exceptional ally for me was a former coworker in a health department. I had always worked for community organizing organizations led by people of color, nonprofits, and then all of a sudden I was in the suburbs or in a public health department, and I didn't even know what public health was, and kind of the environment was drastically different, and I did not feel very comfortable in that space and amongst my coworkers. And there was a woman who was a public health professional that had been working at that department for 25 years. And while she didn't have very high positional power, she had very strong influence and power informally because she was the most senior seasoned public health professional there. And she would see how every single meeting I would get reprimanded for going to talk to community leaders. And people would say, why are you going and taking work time for personal coffee dates, chatting to people? This is not about you connecting personally. And I said, I'm not doing that. This is my work. Identifying leaders in the community, what the needs are, and understanding that the fabric of a community so that we can work authentically with community on public health. And that just wasn't understood very well. And she would see me, she would see the way that I was disregarded in meetings, and she would see the way that I was being reprimanded for things that I just didn't understand and I saw as actually doing the work. And so she came to me and she said, I see what's going on and I think it's completely wrong, and let's work on this together. So she started saying and making the suggestions that I was making. She started supporting my comments and lifting me up and encouraging me in a positive way. And in one meeting, she said something and the whole team was out doing one-on-ones with community members. And so while it was extremely upsetting and frustrating that I could say the same exact thing and it would be reprimanded or dismissed, she could say the same thing and really make a difference. We started to build this true partnership and allyship and figure out how we could work together and move forward. And I never felt tokenized, and I had a very authentic relationship with her. So lifting up each other's voices, building those relationships. But I think the most important thing is coming from a place where you know who you are, you know your culture, you know your identity, and you are not perpetuating or putting your insecurities or your lack of awareness on us. I think that that's always helpful.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, we'll go to you next.
So for me, I want to give this time to really appreciate and tell a story about the success of women giving, advocating for other women. For me, it was my president CEO and my public affairs director at St. Clair Chamber of Commerce. They were really the ones that encouraged me to pursue Minnesota Hmong Chamber of Commerce executive director position. When I was building relationships with Minnesota Hmong Chamber, I was approached by the chair and he said, you should apply for the position. And we are looking for half-time. And I just kind of laughed it off because I thought that I'm very young. I know very little about business, and I know very little of this world. And do you really think that I'm someone who can do this? And he's like, yeah, I think you'll be a good fit. You have good energy, and you know Hmong, and you know the community. And so I went back to my president, CEO, and my public affairs director, and I told them that, oh my God, the chair of Minnesota Hmong Chamber just offered me a job and think that I can do it. And I laughed to them, like, isn't that kind of funny? Ha ha ha. And they looked at me, they said, you should do it. We think you would be great at it. And just those words of affirmation, validation, changed me. So I said, okay, if they believe I can do it, then maybe I should do it. I can really do it. And from then on, they have always been advocating for me, making sure that I have a platform. And they own it, that they're white women and that they don't know what I know, and they shouldn't be the ambassador of my community just because they know me or have me as a staff member. And they've just been great advocates, making sure that I can be the best representative of my community, of the business community in my area. And I just gotta say, I gotta owe it to them because they have given me so many platforms and so many connections to be the person I am today, to give me the encouragement, to give me critical feedback if I fell back on something or was, didn't do so well on certain areas. They were critical on me as well. So having women like that in my life has changed me a lot. I can't speak for other success stories because I'm not in those positions to speak, but I can speak for my own success stories that I've seen that has directly impacted me. And I wish to do that for other women as well. And by doing so, you do have to completely give them a platform, give them a chance to speak their truth, to make their own downfalls, and to pick them back up. Some actions that I see today that may have good intentions but can be damaging to promoting the stories, like Maria said herself. Something that I see is that a lot of other women, and just not women too, other people in general, they generalize women of color's voices. They think that we all have a one representation voice, and that's not true. We're very diverse in our own opinions, in our own political issues, in our own values. And that's something that I see done often, especially in this digital age. And I wish that we can actually take more opportunity to explore different voices of women of color and stop generalizing that, because it's very oppressive and it's not justice to our diverse voices. And yeah, I'll just stop there. So yeah.
Thank you, Yao. Kenya?
You know, I guess that there are a few allies that I can identify in more recent times, but I have to be honest with it, comes to white women, that is just really, there's not one that I hadn't had to push, for the most part to, for them to even be open enough to work through their own fears or whatever that is, So I don't know if it's just kind of the history between Black and white people that might be different from other cultures that create a certain dynamic between Black and white women. But they're known to be our biggest adversaries in the workplace. And so I've often said to them, I find it difficult to be on the picket line for women's right when you're killing me in the workplace. I'm still fighting to wear my natural hair, and just it's a lot. And a lot of we can see it on the TV when we, all these barbecue Beckys and, there's a lot of viciousness that we experience from white women. So I can't really have this conversation without honoring that there's a problem there that is not gonna go away from white allyship, and that white women really need to address within themselves. So that in some cases are spread to people of color, and in other cases are very specific to me as a Black woman. So, and so whatever issues are, I don't know, it might date back to slavery and how the white man treated her and as a result of his abuse of me. I don't know, but I think that needs to be explored. So the white women that and other allies that I've found in that is, I guess I found more struggle with my voice, being heard or respected and honored and feared for whatever reason, by white women in this space, because I'm talking about economics, I'm talking about business, I'm talking about shared space. I found more of those challenges than I found ally support. And even But the couple of ally support that I have found, I'm not suggesting people haven't supported me, but the depths of what that looks like might be based on what power they're willing to share, right, in space. So it's managed. But there's one woman who I appreciate, who has, stepped in and owned what she needs to own about herself, but has been gracious enough to extend her network, her insights, and to me, to help me build and grow in the space that I'm in, right, in this social impact space, in this business, economic wealth building space, and really try to help put me in different roles and positions out here, to, speak here or to build this relationship or know these people and understand how that game is played there. But that's, she's one of a few. And while, again, I'm grateful for any of the support that any has given on the scales they have, I still know that the tension and the limitations of what that looks like has been there. And so we'll see, what happens forward. But again, it is, even amongst Black women, there's a challenge there, right? There's a challenge there. So it's I probably have to slay as many Black women as I help, in the process, in the classism, and all those things that you face. And it's, I come from the neighborhood of the element of Blackness. So that's a different place. And I don't know. So I've just had kind of a variety of different experiences, but overall, it took an incredible amount of work to get Black women to understand why prioritizing us economically was a good idea. One. Two, it takes, I'm constantly being pushed to focus on women of color. That's the whole thing, why don't you become a nonprofit? And then why don't you focus on women of color? Why is it just Black women? So, building in a space where, and I'm not even saying immigrant Black women, I'm saying what I call historical Black women. So it's been incredibly difficult for me to be supported in my space of being a for-profit business, a social enterprise, and who's focusing on Black women, specifically historical, and who's focused on economics. And getting Black women to understand that, getting other, women of color and white women to respect that and not see it as us discriminating, but the fact that, everybody has their own space, why we can't have ours, right? Why do I need to compromise? And so that's been my struggle. And only till recently have people in my experience starting to get it a little bit to say, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? And so now I can start seeing some layers of support, but it is on their terms. So I have to be very, just strong in my stance, my approach, and it may close me off from things, but I'm not willing to compromise on that just to get a couple $100,000 or $50 or for 20 white women to show up and volunteer because they want to do something for, and so that's my reality. I'm hopeful, but that's been the process.
Kenya, thank you for sharing that transparently and authentically. And I know it can be a difficult conversation to have, but I think you're right. We all have to start from a place of acknowledgement and where we are and where our gaps are. So thank you for sharing that. Natalie, we'll wrap this question with you.
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate everyone's viewpoint. I do think that you find allies in different places. And like I said, I just grew up in a way where we had allies in all that we did. So I saw people of different colors and backgrounds come together for common causes throughout my childhood. I think as we fast forward, you go past civil rights and, in the 80s and 90s, the, Rodney King, and then, we're seeing more and more of the killing of young Black men, unarmed Black men, children, young children as well. And you start to think about who's talking about this. And I always say, is anyone talking about it at work? And so what I've found is I've had several allies at work that I could go to and speak to around things that when I came into work that morning, I felt anxious or upset about things that are happening in the community. And I've been able to find those people. Now there's people, and we think about allyship as, you know, a struggler, a neutral observer, and an active ally. So, you know, you kind of have to say, where are you on that plane? And where can you then start to impact? And so I've had several white women that I've been very close with at work that have been those allies. But I also can relate to what Kenya is speaking about, which is there's also, you know, white women who would, you know, just act as if none of this mattered. It didn't impact them, so it didn't matter. But so what I did as a point of, you know, process, I said, I'm going to join our women's network. And so I joined our employee resource group for women, and always thought of it as a network that did not promote, you know, women of color or think about women of color. And so what I found is a very open group of people who are allies, who want to be allies, and maybe not know how to do it. And so I think we also have to put ourselves out there in a different way. And that's kind of been my whole life, right? How do I put myself out there in a way that I can have those conversations? And like I said, in my school district here, where my children went to school, they're being sued for discrimination. The women that, you know, I associate with are, you know, women of color, Black women, traditional Black women, as Kenya said, but then also white women who want to, you know, make a change. I'm very active in our the Democratic Party here in Minnesota, in our district. And these are, there's a few of us Black women in that group. It's mostly white women. So it really is, you know, how do you find those allies that align with you? And then how do you have those conversations? And believe me, just because they're part of the same party doesn't mean we don't have awkward conversations or issues about, oh, you changed your hair, you know, those kinds of discussions. But I think it is, how do I receive it? And then how do I work with it and have a deeper conversation around the history of why this is important, why, you know, a young boy being killed like Trayvon Martin isn't just a blip. It really is another form of lynching. And so how do we, in another Black body that no one cares about? And I just think that these are the things that move us from being a neutral observer to an active ally.
Thank you, Natalie. And it's a great kind of transition. You know, we were going to spend some time talking about COVID and the disproportionate impact that it's having on women and specifically women of color. But I think what you're bringing up and why I say it's a good transition is because now more than ever, whether it's because of COVID or because what's happening and has been happening for centuries in this country, representation matters and matter, and voting matters. So, you know, we do need to wrap due to time, but I want to ask if anyone has any quick closing remarks that they would like to share to just put in that importance of voting, because really that's the impetus for why we're all here today having this conversation.
Yeah, I think if you look at the, you know, there's a record number of women running for office, Black women in particular running for office. And then when we looked at 2018, a record number of women, period. And I think this is where women could really make or break the next election. And so voting in our best interest, not in our husbands or our uncles or traditional, because this is what we've done, but voting in our best interest is what's important. So educate yourself on who's out there and understand what they're for and what they're against. And I think that is the biggest issue. And when we think about equality, think about what's going on right now with COVID. Kids having to go back to school, that a school may not be safe or ready for those children. I mean, who bears the brunt of the COVID change, it's the mother. And that's been read about, written about, proven over and over during this pandemic, whose life has really changed the most? Mom. So women, think about your right and what you bring to the table and vote in your best interest.
Natalie, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. Thank you all for your time. I've just been humbled and honored to speak with all of you today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for everyone who's taken the time to listen to this conversation. As Natalie and everyone said, please get out and vote.
Thank you for joining us for the official launch of the Raising Up the Vote initiative, the intersection of gender and racial equality, a virtual event presented in partnership with Target. Social change comes in part from economic self-sufficiency. Every day, the WBDC works to promote entrepreneurship and create opportunities for women and other diverse business owners. Fair and equitable public policy is critical for economic independence. We encourage our network of business owners throughout the Midwest to use their voices to empower the next generation of women and minority leaders. We hope that this event has left you inspired and provided insights into how each of you can raise your voice and your vote to accelerate opportunities for women, minorities, and other marginalized communities. Thank you to our speakers today and to the WBDC team members who made this event happen. A special thanks to Target Corporation. Without their generous support, the Raising Up the Vote initiative would not have been possible. And to our bronze sponsors, whose financial support allows the WBDC to provide services for businesses across the Midwest: Xcel Energy, Delta Airlines, and Cargill. Last but certainly not least, I would be remiss in not thanking the talented and generous folks at Knock Inc., who donated the creative work that you will see throughout the campaign. Truly, their passion inspires us all. Please mark your calendars for Monday, September 21st, when the WBDC will launch the Raising Up the Vote podcast series, Making Your Mark, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, Women, Voting, and Equality, where influential women share their glass ceiling stories, how they fought for their voice and their rights, became civically engaged, and changed their worlds. That same day, September 21st, we will also present our second Raising Up the Vote virtual event, The Power of Allyship, in partnership with Target. We hope that you will join us in this important effort to raise up the vote. This movement reminds us that we can and should, indeed, we must, pick up our banner today and continue to enact necessary change as we participate in this year's election and other elections to come. Join the movement at #RaiseUpTheVote. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation, and please visit wbdc.org to find other opportunities to be part of our movement.
Raise your hands up. Raise them up. Hey.